Yeah, just like to welcome everyone to another one of our iMoot sessions. I hope you're all holding up well. Looks like Stuart's actually going to go get some sleep. Uh, in this session, we have probably a man who needs no introduction to anyone, Tim Hunt, who works for the Open University in the UK. But Tim, as most of you probably know, is also one of the core Moodle developers, maintaining the quiz module and the questions. And Tim actually did work here in Perth for a year, and so it was a real pleasure to work with him. And today, Tim is presenting. He's doing a couple of presentations coming up next few hours. This one's on the Moodle quiz at the Open University, how we use it and how that helps students. So thank you, Tim, for your time, and I'll hand it over to you.
It's going to work a lot better if I unmute myself, isn't it? Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shane, for that introduction. Somehow I've ended up having to give 3 presentations today, but actually that's because yesterday I was really going and seeing how Moodle quizzes and everything else we do can help students, because I was in Ely for the Open University graduation ceremony. So that was quite enjoyable and quite moving. Anyway, I wasn't sure what sort of audience I would get. So I did put in some slides just to introduce the Open University and explain what we do. How many of you listening know what the Open University is? Excellent. Nice thing about working for the Open University, you meet students and former students pretty often. So most people know, but Sam doesn't. So let me briefly explain. Before I start, the thing I really want to say is this is really not my talk. Most of what you're going to hear when we get to the body of the presentation is all excellent work done by various teaching staff at the Open University. Remind me to credit them as we go along. This is all stuff that I have heard at internal seminars at the Open University or other places. Interesting things that these teachers have found about how students interact with the ICMAs they create, or sorry, we call it quizzes ICMAs because everything at the Open University has a strange acronym. So all I'm really doing is taking interesting stuff I've heard and sharing it with you because I can get better at repeating. Also, the bulk of this presentation really we should called it lots of things. We could have called it lots of interesting graphs. There are going to be a lot of graphs coming up, but I think what makes them interesting is the story behind the graphs. That's what I'm going to be telling you. Also, this sort of thing, if you want to sound grand, you call it the scholarship of teaching and learning. Actually is quite important, and something Moodle has always believed in, that teachers, where possible, should take the time to evaluate how what they're doing is impacting students. But back to the Open University. I didn't know that, Stuart. Well, you must have told me that before. We are entirely a distance university, so it doesn't really matter where we are because we have students all around the country studying at a distance. These days, of course, that means that the website is very important to what students learn, and therefore Moodle is very important to what they learn. But as it happens, we're based right in the middle of the UK. I haven't shown a world map. I'm assuming you know where the UK is. We're kind of halfway between London and Birmingham, and about as far from the sea as you can get in the UK, which is about 200 kilometres or something quite short. Milton Keynes, the Open University was only founded in about the 1960s, and the town it's part of, Milton Keynes, was also created in the 1960s. They took some farmland and designed a rather well-designed town. As you can see, the Open University is surrounded by all sorts of parkland. So it's a very, very beautiful campus and lots of trees on campus. Just zooming in, this is the building I work in, and it's also up the path in the middle is the main reception. And my office is just behind the tree up here somewhere. Yes, Andy, the concrete cows are still there, very close to our local brewery, the Concrete Cow Brewery, of which I am a fan. That's the Open University. As I've said, our websites are very important, and this is what a course in our Moodle site looks like. I'm going to be struggling all talk because what Moodle calls courses, we at the Open University call modules, so I'll probably just use the two words interchangeably, and I hope it isn't too confusing. This is a maths course, and as you can see, they're using the quiz. We have a rather nice course format that's a bit like the weekly format, but actually it just sort of shows you the current week highlighted and a couple of weeks each side. You can also see that at the Open University, a week is not necessarily a week, because what's actually you've got here, each bit in the study planner is 2 weeks in the real world. You can combine weeks. But otherwise, it's kind of a fairly typical Moodle site. Each week is a bunch of activities. This course, I mean, we also still send out printed books through the post. So the bulk of what students are reading is probably still in print, and anything we send them in print, they can probably also get as an ebook or a PDF. They prefer digital. Just to say we're quite big, I just picked this out of our monitoring systems one day last week. You can see the typical pattern of our load. You can see we are very much in one time zone, but the students study all day, starting between sort of 7 and 9 in the morning. Quite a lot of students come on. Some days you can see a really big peak around lunchtime because people are studying at work in their lunch hour. But this day, I think might be the weekend day. And then it goes on late into the evening. You know, our students are studying part-time, often beside full-time jobs. So it doesn't really ramp down until getting towards midnight. We're quite proud of the fact our average page load times, which you can see at the bottom, are under a third of a second for most pages, and then occasional ones. On this day, 40,000 different users logged in, viewed 1.3 million pages. So we have a very big Moodle site, run on lots of servers. We host it ourselves. I shouldn't really be talking about this because this time last year I gave a presentation all about how we host Moodle. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, look back at the recording here. But I just thought you might be interested in a little bit about how we run Moodle. And actually, that's just our main Moodle site where we have one website for each module that students are studying. We have some other Moodles floating around. We have quite a cool. We've got Open Learn, which is our open courseware site, but we also have something called Learn. This is quite a cool site that won an award recently. It's called the Open Science Laboratory, which is exploring the question of can you do science online. And I think in some cases the answer is clearly yes. If you're a professional astronomer, you know, you sit at your computer in your office and you can control the telescope the other side of the world. Well, we have in some of our science courses, students get to control the telescope on the Canary Islands through the Open Science Lab. Anyway, so I think we've got more than 10 different Moodle sites now for different purposes. This is the big one. And just a little bit very briefly about how we use the quiz. I think the whole talk's going to be about that. But I realised the talk had a lot of graphs and not many quizzes, so just a couple of examples of what we do. Obviously, maths is an area where computers can assess quite complicated things. This is a very tricky integration question. Just people who are maths phobic, but you need to battle your fear. So The point about this is it's kind of open-ended question. Students get some calculation. There is an issue with maths about how you get students to type something normally written like this, and they have to type it like this. But, our solution is that as they type, we show them what it sort of looks like in more conventional notation. In little terms, the audio okay for most people? Okay, well, let's carry on. The tip I heard is if things are really breaking up, just go back to the course and come back into the presentation. Anyway, in Moodle terms, the sort of key points here are that this quiz is set up using what Moodle calls interactive with multiple tries behavior. So I didn't really demonstrate that because when I was taking the screen capture, I got the question right first time. But a lot of our quizzes are set up with the interactive behavior. So if the students get the answer wrong, they'll get a little bit of feedback and then can click the try again button and try and use that feedback to correct their own mistake. And if they get it wrong a second time, they'll get a little bit more of a hint, and a third try. And after 3 tries, if you haven't got it, then we just show you the worked example. And also, we always, in Moodle, we always use almost always use the general feedback field. So here, even though the student got the question right, we also show them the full work solution, just in case they kind of got to the right answer, but they're not entirely sure why. This kind of shows them why. And also, a thing we often do in our feedback, give a reference to the appropriate bit of the study material. So if they're still not getting it, they can go back and sort of reread that bit of the chapter. So that's maths, sort of from a different faculty. We have a languages question, nice one with an embedded media file. And again, this one's using interactive with multiple tries. In this case, just 2 tries at this question. So that, I mean, because our students are studying at a distance, most of the assessments they do are kind of written assignments. They'll make a Word document and upload it, and it gets graded, but they probably don't get the grade for a week or 2. For our students, the thing the Moodle quiz can do that nothing else can is it can give them feedback immediately. That's one of the key things. We do also have quite a lot of quizzes that are deferred feedback, so actually they don't get the feedback till later. I always feel it's useful. It does the testing we need, but I kind of feel it misses the full power of what Moodle can do for students. And we do this at very large scale. We started with Moodle back in about 2006, and this is the number of online quizzes done each year. Don't worry about the last bar, that's only from part of the year. It'll end up as tall as the others. It is a bit sad that it's starting to go down, and that's nothing about our online quizzes. That's entirely thanks to the UK government, who back in 2012 changed how higher education was funded. That's been very bad for part-time higher education. So what you're actually seeing in this dip is a dip in overall student numbers. The sort of average number of tests per student is going up. I'd like to say I could see a change in the higher education funding landscape, but I can't. It's very worrying, actually, what the current higher education funding is doing to all part-time universities in the UK. Anyway, on the bulk of this talk, which is really about what we've learned about, from all these Moodle quizzes in courses. We don't just kind of do them and assume they're working. Various academic staff in various faculties have wanted to know if it's making a difference, and have therefore been able to get some time to research whether it's making a difference. And this is sort of stuff. Some of this stuff has been done over years, but I'm sort of bringing it all together. Now, at this point, it would be very helpful to know who I have in the audience. So if you could just quickly type kind of one word or more to say, what is your role with Moodle? Are you a teacher? Are you a Moodle admin? Are you a learning designer? Are you a developer? Or how do you describe your main role? Okay, I hope with at least some of your roles, this will be interesting. So, um, the first graph is actually the one I saw most recently, um, and this shows data from our. I think lots of universities do this. At the end of every course, students are given a questionnaire to fill in, what they thought about the course and the teacher and how it was done and so on. And the interesting this graph just shows the answers to three of the questions from that survey. And what's interesting is that for each course, how similar the bars are. So that suggests that the answer to all three of these questions are very strongly related. And the first bar in each group, the groups are each different courses, just sort of picked at random. First bar is, of course, the most important question. Overall, were you satisfied with this module you just studied? And you can see that on the whole, it's quite high. But the interesting is the other two seem to be very strongly related to that key overall question. And the second question was, the blue one is, it was clear what I had to do to complete the assessed work. And that seems to be, having the assessed task being clear seems to be quite important to whether students like the module. And most interesting, the third bar is, do you think the assessed activities helped you learn? And again, that seems to be very important. And I find that quite interesting because I've sat in seminars with academics. I mean, I'm not a teacher, I'm a developer, but I've sat in seminars with academics where they're talking about issues like authentic assessment, really assessing what you're really trying to teach, not artificial assessment tasks. And, is this just teachers talking or does it make a difference? Well, here, I think this shows that students can actually tell whether you're getting the assessment right, whether the hoops then being made to jump through are really helping them learn, or rather than being kind of artificial tasks to fill in time. And I was really interested that students can clearly tell if you're getting this right, and that it has such a strong link to the overall satisfaction. Of course, what I haven't shown you is sort of for comparison any other questions, but I've seen other versions of this graph for other questions in the survey, and they're much more kind of randomly scattered. So these are the ones where there's a really strong link. Yeah. There's another thing academics say, actually, I've heard, which is that you have your course guide or your learning outcomes or whatever, but in fact, it's what you assess defines the real curriculum of your course or the hidden curriculum of your course. That's that up. So that was one graph. The next one is a little bit more complicated, not just because it comes from a quantum mechanics course. So I don't know if there's anyone in the room who's ever studied some quantum mechanics. 20 years ago I did, and I might once have known how to answer this question, but I've certainly forgotten now. This is a level 3 physics course. Because our students study part-time, we can't talk about first year, second year, third year, because they typically take 6 years to do a degree. So we talk about level 1, level 2, level 3. So this is a level 3 physics course. It comes at the end, at the end of the physics degree, and it is hard. And because it's hard, they were finding that a lot of students were getting to the exam and just failing because the teaching wasn't actually getting them to the point where they could pass the exam. Not everyone, but just more students than they liked were getting to the end of this module and not being able to pass it. And so they wanted to do something about that. And actually, while I say this module, well, I'm just talking about this one quantum mechanics module. In fact, at level 4 physics, there are 4 modules that students can choose, and there were similar problems in all of them, and they tried similar things, and the data I'm going to show you for one module actually applies to all 4. They saw the same pattern in 4 modules, so you can sort of believe it's not a one-off fluke. So initially this course had 4 written assignments, and as I've said, students hand in a written assignment, and maybe a week or 2 later they get some excellent feedback from their tutor about what they did wrong and the marks. But of course, by then they've kind of forgotten what they were thinking. So the obvious solution to this one, I don't know if it was obvious, I mean, the module team sat down and thought about it, but what they decided to try was to add some online quizzes, so students could practice what they need to be able to do and get the immediate feedback. And what they did was a little bit complicated, but basically they didn't want to overload the students. So while they introduced 6 online quizzes in addition to the 4 written assignments, they said it was up to students. They could choose which 7 assessed activities they did. You know, you could do 4 written assignments and 3 online quizzes, or 2 written assignments and 5 online quizzes. And they didn't mind if you chose to do more. That was excellent practice and very good, but they couldn't expect all students to do that. Only had to do at least 2 written assignments that your tutor got to see. So you had to be somewhere in this green region. So that's what they did, and this is what students did. The numbers here are how many students chose to do each combination. As you can see, I mean, something you often see with distance education, a lot of students started the course and found it wasn't for them and withdrew. But most students did actually get to the end and do enough work. And of course, the key thing is not just how many assignments students chose to do, but what was the effect on their exam results. And so these are the average exam results for students who did different amounts of assessment. And that's exactly what you want to see, really. That students, the students who did all the work we set for them got better grades. I should probably explain the OU grading scale a bit. 40% is always the pass mark. So actually slightly worrying down in this little box, even though students have done what we thought was enough work, on average they failed. I mean, there'll be a few students in there and probably 1 failed and the rest passed. They're still not great, but you can see that the more work students did, the better mark they got, which is something you want to see. But always in education research, you have to be very careful about the difference between correlation and causation. I mean, theory 1 looking at these numbers is, our online tests are brilliant, therefore they help, and students who do all the online tests get a high mark, therefore the online tests help students. But unfortunately, that's not the only possible explanation. The other explanation is better students are more enthusiastic and find it easier to do the online tests, therefore better students do more tests. And the tests aren't actually helping them. Excuse me. And a lot of research in education suffers from this problem. It's very hard to tell which explanation really applies. But these were scientists who know about data, and so they weren't happy not having the explanation. So they thought of one way they might be able to work out better what was going on. Now, one thing we've developed at the Open University over the years is some sort of statistical modelling that looks at the students on a course, their sort of demographic background, their prior education, and it sort of can come up with a guess of what sort of grade they might get. Which wouldn't be reliable for an individual student, but across a group of students, it gives a reasonable guess at what sort of grade you might expect the students to get on a typical course. And then you can look at particular courses and see if students are doing better or worse than that guess. the reason it's important is one of the key features of the Open University is open access. So our courses are designed for to be attempted by anyone, particularly at the first level. So and that makes it difficult because you get lots of students with very little prior educational experience coming in, and they need a lot of support. And if you just look at like average grades, student courses that do better at attracting new students do get worse average grades because the students need, are starting from lower down. So that's why we have this model that lets us sort of control for prior knowledge. So they were able to use this in this course. They looked at the kind of predicted grades for all the students in each box and compared the exam scores with the predicted grades. And when you do that, that sort of hopefully controls for the effect of the more enthusiastic students or the better students. And what we can see is even controlling sort of prior, level on entry to the course, students who are doing a lot of the work were getting better exam scores than predicted, and students who weren't doing the work were getting very much worse exam scores. Slightly worrying thing is students who'd just done the minimum that was required, their actual exam scores were less than predicted. But overall, I think this is quite strong evidence that the online quizzes and the other assessment in the course is actually helping students. And this may not be very dramatic. I mean, you talk about time on task. Basically, the more you study, the better you do. But the point is, it's no good spending time in an unproductive way. I think what we can say is doing the assessment does seem to be a productive way for students to use their time. So that's some of the clearest evidence we have that kind of good assessment and particularly good quizzes help students. Andy, you asked about, does this mean that tutors mark more harshly than the computer? I don't think that's what's going on here. Tutors obviously give better feedback. I mean, they can look at what a student's done and have a better idea about what the student might be confused about, give guidance about that. The Moodle quizzes can only give the feedback that's been pre-programmed in. Anyway, so that was one of the longer and more complicated stories in this talk. Now, the next one is sort of similar, but at the other end of the spectrum. Previously, we were looking at level 3 physics at the end of a degree. This is an introductory course at the start of a degree with this great title, Robotics and the Meaning of Life. And this, but this was another module where they were having problems with not as many students passing the course as they would have wished. And in this case, I think the problem was this was the first course a lot of students were doing, and for some reason they weren't really confident. They'd get to the end of the course and would think they were just going to fail, so didn't bother to submit the final assessment, and therefore, of course, they did fail. So the final assessment had 2 parts. There were some short answer questions and then a sort of small programming project that had to be written up, and all this got put into a Word document and uploaded to be marked. What they did, the change they made, is they took all the short answer questions and made them into a Moodle quiz project as a separate written thing that was uploaded. And otherwise the course stayed the same. And this is the situation before the change that they were unhappy with. And already there's a weird thing here. You'll notice that students who start in October and study in winter are more likely to complete the course than students who start in May and study over summer. And that's quite weird, and I don't know that, but it is a pattern we see on quite a lot of modules, that which start date students choose makes a difference to the average success. I've never heard a really good explanation of why that is. But anyway, that was a situation before they introduced the new assessment strategy. And after the assessment strategy, this happened. Yay! It appeared to work. Lots more students were now, what seemed to be happening is because this is just one graph, they looked into this in more depth. students would get to the end and they would try the short answer questions online in the Moodle quiz and feel they were getting there and submit that. And then they would have the confidence to do the project, have a go at the project and hand in what they'd done. In the following October presentation, again, less dramatic, but it seems to have gone up a bit more. And of course, what we would really like now is some more data. But as I say, the UK government changed higher education funding in 2012, and one of the side effects of that is that this module got cancelled. I mean, it was no longer viable in its form, so unfortunately the data stops there. So we think it worked, but we would have liked a few more years data to be sure, and we couldn't get it. But again, it seems switching it's odd because they were sort of similar questions, but somehow switching the questions from being part of a larger written assignment to a separate online quiz seems to have made it less daunting for students to actually do them. Now, I am already forgetting to give credit where credit is due. The robotics course, the person in charge of that is someone called John Rosewell. This is his analysis. Level 3 physics, which we're about to get back to, this was a course team chaired by someone called John Bolton. It doesn't really matter if I forget to credit people, because in the course, in the iMoot Moodle course for this talk, I've given links to where you can find more of their research to download. Now, this is back to the level 3 physics. By 2010, they kind of had some evidence that these online quizzes were making a difference for students. So the question was, how many students were bothering to do them, and what could we do to encourage more students to do them? So initially, because, they wanted students to do these quizzes if at all possible. So to start with, they decided, well, let's have a recommended date by which students should do this particular assignment. They're studying this material here, so they should do this assessment by this date. But what happened is only about 40% of students had done the work by that date, and a couple of weeks later, maybe 60%, and then not very much happened. And then just before the exam, there were students who'd got behind suddenly thought, oh, I'd better do that. That might be good preparation for the exam. And in the end, we got to about 80% of students who had submitted by the end of the course, which is not bad, because they didn't have to do all the online tests. They, as you say, they could choose any 7 assessed activities. But could we do better? And what they decided to try, in the hope it would make things better, is that they thought, let's try changing this sort of advisory deadline into a hard deadline. So you do it by this date, or you don't do it at all. Now, would any of you like to guess what happened when they made that change? We've got 2 votes for no change and 1 vote for completion increased. Well, Richard is right. That's what happened. With a hard deadline, really quite startlingly more students submitted. Yeah. So, yeah, yes, so these are adult learners. There's also another interesting thing that for written assignments, there is a system by which students can ask for an extension to their deadline if they're too busy. And, I say we adopted Moodle about 9 years ago. I've always wondered, is someone going to come and ask us for the feature? Actually, Moodle now has the feature that you can give an extension to a particular student. I've always wondered, are we going to have to implement that? Was I going to get asked to implement that feature for the Moodle quiz? And the answer was no. Our Moodle quizzes, the deadline is the deadline, and there's no extension. Anyway, So yes, in this case at least, and as I say, they saw the same thing across all four modules in level 4 physics. Hard deadlines seemed to get more students to actually take the effort, because at the time when they were supposed to be studying the material, it was kind of use this now or lose it, and by and large, students seem to have used it. I suppose it would be interesting to see us do a similar experiment in a completely different type of module. So that's quite surprising, quite cool. Another one is significantly less surprising, is what happens for graded versus. So this is an ungraded quiz. I can't remember which module this is, but it's got 4 optional quizzes. It's a level 1 module in science, and in the first module, students are quite enthusiastic. There looks like there are about 650 students. At least 650 students did the first question in the first quiz. You can see that in every quiz, as you go through the quiz, students stop doing the questions at some point, but most of them get to the end. And you can see that, but as you go through the course, each successive quiz gets fewer students doing it. Also, I should say this is a quiz that allows multiple attempts. So what you're seeing here is that 650 students attempted the first quiz, and some of them made repeated attempts, like quite a lot of people made a second attempt or a third or a fourth. So this is the total number of attempts at this question, and this is the total number of different students who attempted it. But if it's optional, I'm just showing the graphs here. There were probably also another component to this research where we gave students a questionnaire, and I'm sure lots of students said in the questionnaire how helpful the Moodle quizzes were, how much they liked the feedback, and so on. But although they say they like the feedback, there's a significant drop-off in the number of students who do each quiz, which is a bit of a pity if they think they're helpful. Is it just they're running out of time? So they say they're helpful when we ask them with a smile on our face. They don't really believe it. So what happens when you add grades? Well, it's not particularly surprising. This is a different course, so the total numbers are lower, but you can see that with a quiz that's part of the credit for the course, the drop-off is much, much less. There's still a bit of a drop-off, but as I say, in all distance education, you do get students withdrawing throughout the course. That's probably most of what you're seeing here. So generally, in education, if you really want to get students to do something, make it a graded activity, which is a little bit sad because it's kind of extrinsic motivation, not intrinsic motivation. But on the other hand, well, it's back to what I said, that what you assess is the kind of shows it's what you're putting the value on. The value in education, the sort of currency at any rate is the value. The currency we have is grades. Yep. So what gets measured is what gets done. Back to the point, you should really try as hard as possible to make sure your assessment questions are good and really test what you want students to know. That's pretty clear, the difference there between the drop-off in an optional quiz to a compulsory one. Where do we go next? But really, again, I've said that whenever we survey students about our ICMAs, our quizzes, they say how much they like the feedback and how helpful it is. Another of our academics, Sally Jordan, the reason I was at graduation ceremony yesterday was that Sally Jordan was getting her PhD, which includes this work. That was nice to see. She's done this work that kind of starts to look at whether students are actually doing anything with our feedback. So, as I said, a lot of our quizzes use what Moodle calls the interactive behavior with multiple tries. So, and when you answer a question, you get 3 chances to get it right, with increasing feedback between each chance. And what this sort of view of the data looks at is, for this particular question, on the first try, sort of 55% of students got it right, and 45% of students got it wrong. And so the students got it wrong will have another go after a bit of feedback. And after a bit of feedback, it's, and half the students then managed to get the question right based on that little bit of help. And the other half put in a different wrong answer and got it wrong again. So they got a bit more feedback, and students who got it wrong twice with that extra bit of feedback, a few more got it right. So by the end, what's that, sort of 5/6 of students have got to the right answer. And again, the rest mostly put in a different wrong answer. So this is an interactive question. Well, it's a fairly easy one because by the end, sort of 80+% of people have got it right. But it's working the way we want. Students have got to the right answer, possibly after one or two hints. So that's what we'd like to see. This is an example of a question that is not what we want to see. So to start with, on the first try, not only did some, 20%, 40% of students got it right and 40% got it wrong, but there's this rather worrying 20% at the bottom who kind of didn't put in an answer at all, or put in rubbish. So that's a bit worrying. What we'd like is for the students to try to answer the question, so when they see the feedback, they've kind of got some thoughts going around in their brain that may or may not be right. But here, students are not even bothering to think, seemingly, before clicking the check button. And then I'll return to your point, Pete, in a minute. On the second try, again, we see some students get it right on the second try, some try a different answer, but quite a lot of students here, the red is basically that they put in exactly the same answer as they did the first time. And we really don't want to see that. Again, seemingly they're not putting in any effort on their own. They're sort of seeing the feedback, but they don't really mean anything to them, so they're just clicking check again. And again, on the third try, very few more people got it right. Quite a lot changed their answer, but there's still quite a lot of people submitting the same work. So this is bad. And again, this is just the data. What does it mean? I mean, is it just that these are lazy students? That's one hypothesis. Sally actually dug into this data, and it seemed actually what was going on here is this question was just too difficult. At least it was something students hadn't really been taught. So quite a lot of students are not taught very well. So students are getting this question thinking, I don't know, what are you asking me? So it wasn't just that they were lazy, it was actually this question was kind of asking something that hadn't been taught properly, and that's why students are struggling. As you can see, overall, 50% eventually got it right. So, although they sort of started from, is this just lazy students, they ended up with actually maybe we need to rethink that bit of the module. So this was kind of different questions about that. Is this a sound bad for everybody? Right, I will try, I think, going out of here and coming back in, and hopefully that will fix the audio. No, the audio won't be better until I unmute myself. Can you hear me now? Right. Trish, you said you didn't understand something I said at the end. Is it worth going back to? I see. Okay, so this comparison of graphs is actually comparing two different questions, and possibly even, given the number of students involved, two different questions on different tests or different courses. The next comparison is quite interesting because it's in fact exactly the same question and exactly the same quiz that was reused from one module to another. The graph on the right showed what happened to this quiz in its original home, which was a Maths for Sciences course, and it worked pretty well. That's the kind of thing we'd like to see, students getting it right in the end, trying different answers each time. The graph on the left is when the quiz was reused in a small part of a larger module, and it performed slightly worse, more students repeating the same answers, and fewer of them getting it right in the end, even though it was kind of meant to be a very similar module. I never really heard well, there were various theories about why that might have happened. And in fact, try and explain, say this was work by Sally Jordan, and she wrote about it on her blog, which I've linked to from the course site. Sorry, I've lost the chat. No, I haven't. Was it Andy who asked? No, Rob asked, can the Moodle quiz generate these graphs? And I'm afraid no, it can't at the moment. These were generated by someone downloading the data from the responses report and doing the analysis, probably in Excel, to produce the graphs. Someone probably could make a quiz report plugin, generate graphs like this. Actually, if you went to Richard's talk just before this one, you'll have seen how easy it is to make a Moodle plugin. So the final thing is something a little bit different, not so much what particular quizzes do, but instead really the kind of story that led to a new Moodle question type. So I think it started back in about 2005, and it's Sally Jordan again, another part of her PhD work. She was interested, could we get computers to automatically grade sentence length answers? So sort of factual scientific questions like, why does oil float on water? This screen grab kind of gives the game away because you can see the computer has graded it. Not just that, this is a fairly subtly wrong answer. I said the oil floats on water because it's less dense, and that's been marked wrong because I haven't made it clear that the reason oil floats is because oil is less dense than water. I mean, because of the ambiguities of the English language, you could read this sentence and think I'm saying the oil floats on water because water is less dense. It is ambiguous. And the computer's been able to determine that on the right lines, it's something to do with density, but I haven't made it clear that oil is less dense than water. Or various ways you could say that. But back in 2005, they didn't even know if this was possible. So they set out to try and find out if this could be made to work. And the first thing they wanted to do, when we say can computers grade these questions, they decided to see, well, how good are humans at grading these questions? And it was quite surprising how inconsistent humans are. You look here, the sort of range. So what they did is the person, they got some, what's that, 7 sample questions, and they got a whole lot of answers students had given to those questions. And Sally, the researcher who had written the questions, graded them all by hand, and then we paid 6 OU tutors to grade the same questions and compared how many of the marks actually matched, and there was quite a lot of disagreement. Typically the agreement between the human markers was only about 90%. Yeah, and in fact, what tends to happen with these questions is a lot of the answers will be clearly right. The student said what you're looking for, and that gets the tick. And quite a lot of answers will be clearly wrong. The student said something that's just, clearly not right. But then you get all the answers in the middle that are sort of on the, like the answer I had in the screen grab, it's sort of on the right lines, but have they actually said the key, have they shown they really have the key fact? Do they get the mark or not? And it's basically those slightly ambiguous answers in the middle that are hardest both for humans and also for the computers. It seems to be the similar answers that, the reason the computer's struggling about whether to give this grade or not is because a human would also struggle to decide, is this quite good enough? So that's where a lot of the disagreement lies. So it does seem that the kind of baseline for what is good enough grading for this sort of question, well, you can beat, humans get about 90 to 95 consistency. So if you can do better than that, that's probably as good as you can hope for. One other slightly interesting about this data, question G was clearly the hardest to mark. The computer's down at under 90% and the humans are down at kind of 80%. And it turns out that actually what's going on here is that this is a fairly badly worded question. It was about reading some data off the graph, and it wasn't entirely clear what they wanted you to, which point they wanted you to pick. And so it led to a lot of these kind of ambiguous answers that you don't know if they're really right or wrong. So again, interestingly, it was the same question that was hardest for the computer and the humans to grade consistently. And it does show that getting your assessment clearly worded is important again. So that's where they started, and initially they used some software from a small company based at Stirling University, I think it was, somewhere in Scotland, called Intelligent Assessment Technologies. It was terribly clever kind of computational linguistics stuff, and they found it worked, at least as well as humans. And they were quite pleased with that. They wrote it up, and then they did a bit more research. Because this was commercial software, we had to pay for it. And we kind of remembered that in the back drawer, well, no, not in the back drawer, something we used. We had this sort of algorithm called pattern match that we were using in other software to grade much shorter answers, just one or two words. But we decided to try and see if this pattern match system could also grade full sentences. So they and there's another way of sort of matching text in a sort of flexible way called regular expressions that computer programmers used. So they paid a graduate student one summer to have a go with pattern match and regular expressions to see if it could do as well as the clever, fancy computational linguistics. Because pattern match is just like, have you got this word? Have you got that word? Are these words close together or in this order? And what they found is, by and large, the much simpler pattern match thing was pretty much as good as the expensive, fancy computational linguistics thing. And they found that for this kind of sentence matching, regular expression is really quite hard. I mean, so these were the kind of sort of marking quality. The other thing this doesn't show is how easy it was to create the questions. And the problem with the fancy linguistics stuff is that, as we saw before, English is ambiguous. So, there are words like run could be a verb, something you do, or it could be a thing like a running cricket. So, the computer would look at this word and decide, this is a verb or this is a noun. And if it got that wrong, it was then kind of in a mess and he couldn't really fix it. The simple pattern match was, because it's so simple, you can actually understand what it's doing. So not only was pattern match almost as good as the complex thing, it was much easier to work with. And again, the student who doing this sort of thought that doing the pattern match took half the time as trying to write the regular expressions, and the regular expressions weren't as good anyway. So in the end, we found this nice old algorithm called pattern match that we'd had knocking about for years, being gradually improved, was the thing to use. When I say old, I think it was first used in the 1970s on some sort of mainframe system, probably in Fortran, and it's been rewritten into everything, Pascal, C, C++, Java, and now PHP. So the end result of all this research was a question type you can download from the Moodle plugins database called the pattern match question type. And if you can work out how to use it, you can use it to grade sentence length answers. Well, or even just, it's kind of, at one end you can try and grade complete sentence answers. At the other end, you can just use it as a slightly better version of Moodle's short answer question type. But that was quite nice, and went from really kind of improvised research use into now a mainstream Moodle question type that everyone can have. So I think those were the various stories and graphs I wanted to show you. I think the key points of what we've covered are that getting assessment right is important. None of this is particularly radical. Getting assessment right is important. Both students can tell that, and it does seem to make a difference to their learning. Online quizzes can be a powerful learning tool. Of course, they're not the answer to everything, but in their place, they can make a big difference. When you dig into the data, you can find quite interesting things about how the students are learning with the quizzes and other things you provide for them. Also, something I didn't really talk about much in this talk, but if you start looking at the responses students give to some of these questions, it can be a good way to identify the common misconceptions. I didn't really give many examples of that in this talk, but it's another thing that's come out of a lot of this research. And finally, computers can grade much more than multiple choice. We saw at the end in depth the kind of sentence grading, and if you go back to the screen grab at the start, the computer was automatically grading some quite sophisticated open-ended maths. So this can be done. And that was everything I wanted to tell you. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them now. Yes, Rob, that is available. Let me find the link. Ah, brilliant, Richard beat me to it. Yes. Sorry about the sound quality issues in the middle. Andy, that is a good point, something I didn't really talk about. Preparing a good online quiz with a lot of feedback is a lot of work, and that was something I didn't put in my presentation, but I could have done. Let me try this screen sharing. So a couple of weeks ago, I was at a Moodle Moot in Dublin. Excuse me, and in association with the organisers, we ran a survey of people coming to the Moot about how they used quizzes. Hopefully you can see that. And this is the result of the survey we did, well, some of the results. And one of the things we asked teachers was, overall, do you think using quizzes saves you time? And quite a majority thought that quizzes did actually save time overall. I mean, as you say, it's not obvious that the work you do, and it's different. With a classic assignment, you spend lots of time later grading all the answers by hand. With a quiz, you do work up front to create the quiz. But the consensus, at least of the people who answered the survey, who are probably a self-selecting sample of people who like the Moodle quiz, but they felt, most of them, that it saved them time. The other question that was really pleasingly one-sided was we also asked, do you think the quizzes help your students learn? And in this survey, 85% of people said yes and about 5% said no. So that means there were 10% who weren't sure. But that was also a very pleasing yes answer. We did ask people why. I need now to go through all the results of this survey and kind of probably write them up on my blog to summarize what we said, because there were some interesting answers. The other thing to say about the time involved in quizzes, the first year you do one, it's going to be a lot of work. In future years, if you can reuse the same quiz, then of course it's kind of pure saving. As I say,
Hey Tim, Shane here. I just thought I'd jump in and just to say thank you for your presentation. Thanks for sharing with everyone, and really appreciate your time. And I hope you can get a bit of rest before your next presentation.
Yep, I think I've got a couple of hours before I have to fix a bug live on air. Why did I agree to do that?